Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday. Happy first Friday of March. What a great time of year, right? We're transitioning. You might be aware of that today by the weather. But hopefully you, like myself, are looking forward to spring and warmer months, which maybe invites different food choices, perhaps some that you grow your own or those that you find at your local farmer's market. And maybe we'll talk about that today. Maybe we'll talk about that in future Ask the Dietitians. Thank you for joining us. If you're watching on Facebook Live or seeing this recorded on YouTube, welcome. If you registered for this program, you have access to these slides. We will send them to you after our program today. This is one of my favorite programs that I've ever been involved with as a dietitian now for over 20 years. It's called Ask the Dietitian, and it's all about giving our participants at the center the opportunity to ask us their questions related to the topic that we choose. So for the month of March, we've decided to celebrate National Nutrition Month. So did you know that every year during the month of March, there's a campaign that really it's run by the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and it really intends to help the public make informed choices about the foods that they eat. And working with a dietitian can ideally help you with that. However, I think on a broader scale, we're constantly bombarded with information, right? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit today. But the topic of this year's campaign is Food Connects Us, as you can see. And so we thought we would run our Ask the Dietitian this month all about that and all about how we have a relationship with food. And so our participants, it never fails, they ask some really great questions, and I have a handful to get through today. So I'm going to run through the presentation rather quickly, so buckle up. I'm really happy that you're here with us. So on the agenda, I'm going to list the questions and provide the answers to the best of my ability, and then offer some additional resources and recipes. One of the bonus aspects of signing up for this program or registering for the Ask the Dietitian is that you get the recipes. So sometimes people are really happy to receive them, and I'd love to hear back from our participants if you've ever tried them. Okay, so let's get right to those questions. So the first is, when and how does our relationship with food become a detriment? I thought this was a really great place to start. What a great question that is. It's possible, right? It's possible that we might have a detrimental way of interacting with food. So, one of the most empowering elements of food is that it's ultimately up to us. We decide what to eat and how to experience eating, right? Are you someone who dines, who savors your food, or are you someone who sort of mindlessly eats, right? And maybe you're distracted or busy doing other things while you're eating and you miss out on that experience of eating. If we experience a lot of stress and guilt about our food choices, about how many calories we're eating, or even our eating habits, this potentially could be detrimental, right? Because we know that stress is not beneficial for us. Some would define this as what we would call disordered eating, and this could be a precursor for an eating disorder, which requires professional evaluation and treatment. Obsession, feeling out of control, extreme restrictions or binging, feeling guilty or ashamed on an extreme level, using food as coping mechanisms, constantly comparing yourself to others or the way that you eat to other people, or avoiding social situations that involve food, they are all signs of an unhealthy relationship with food, right? That is not a way of eating that serves you or serves your health. Now, when we feel this way, and more often than not, and if it's on an extreme level, we probably could benefit from some support. So if you feel like this is you, or you can relate to this on any level, I would encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider and consider adding both a dietitian and a licensed counselor, especially those who are experienced in either eating disorders or disordered eating, and you could talk with someone about that. And add them to your team for some help. We can reframe the way that we think, and this is why a counselor is very important as part of that team. We can reframe the way that we think about eating and learning how to listen to our body. But that takes some time and some practice, and I'm going to talk about that today. And that's some of the work that I get to do here at Cancer Wellness Center, which is really exceptional. So if you, again, are concerned about maybe potentially having some habits that look like it's disordered eating or an eating disorder, you're welcome to take this self-quiz. And so you'll just click on this link when you receive the slides and you can bring the results right to your healthcare provider. That's what I would encourage that you do. Okay. And of course, you can reach out to me directly at the center for more guidance as well. Next question. Why do normal, I quote unquote normal people eat to live, while many who struggle with their weight live to eat? And we all know those people, right? They just live to eat. Or some people just eat to live, right? Now, I think this question's an interesting one, right? So how do we define normal? I think of normal as being like standard, right? And then we start to think about is there a standard way to eat? Is there a standard body weight or body shape or body size? I don't think so. I think that it's having differences that make us all special, unique, and beautiful, right? So that's how I'm approaching this question. Then there's a neurobiology involved with how our appetite is regulated. So hang in with me on this. It's kind of sciencey, but it's really interesting. The way we eat, it's really complex and it's influenced by a lot of factors that regulate that whole process. Now, the drive to eat, which is known as our appetite, that's often motivated by a few things. Hunger, of course, right? Fullness, so whether or not we have that appetite, and then also reward. And that's probably the most interesting one out of all three, right? So all three of those components speak to each other. And several regions in our brain actually sense those signals through what's called the gut-brain axis. And maybe you've heard about that. Now, there's neurons within our brain that produce dopamine and that peaks, especially after we eat something sweet. So therefore, it makes sense. We might feel good after we have something sweet. So a lot of times we want to eat sweet because we want to feel good, right? It's that dopamine effect. Now, GLP-1, and I'm going to talk more about this in the next question, especially, it helps to regulate our appetite. We make GLP-1, and it regulates our appetite so that we eventually learn to stop eating, right? Because we sense that fullness. Natural levels of GLP-1, they differ among each of us, right? So that is partly part of the reason why we have various appetites, why some of us might live to eat or eat to live, right? While this also in the science, and this is sort of evolving, but we think GLP-1 also, the differences might explain our body shape and our body size. Really fascinating. New findings are emerging, as I shared, and the GLP-1 prescriptions have changed the way that clinicians think about body weight. I think there's still a lot of room to go with this area. I will say that. But I'm hopeful that with this information, hopefully more information that's accurate is going to be disseminated from our medical community. So, for example, our new way of thinking now is that if someone has a diagnosis of diabetes, it's rather than it's a problem of the pancreas, there's a recognition that the entire body is affecting diabetes, not just the pancreas, right? It's not like these things work in isolation, but there's more of a systemic influence here on some of our disease and disease risks. There's also better understanding about obesity as it relates to being a disease now, and other diseases that are complex neurometabolic diseases. So neurometabolic means the nervous system and our metabolism. So if you're curious, and I'm gonna share more about this in the presentation today, some use intuitive eating as a way to enjoy cravings in moderation for balance and satisfaction. What do you know? So what that is sort of tapping into those three components, right? Hunger, fullness, and reward. And how can we pay attention to some of those signs? And really that's internal. Has nothing to do with anything external, but it's all internal. And how can we tap into that to eat in a way that serves us ultimately in the end? Okay, next question. How to eliminate food noise? Have you heard about food noise yet? All right, so let's first define it. So food noise is really basically thinking about all food all the time, right? So especially those that are highly palatable, like sugary foods, fatty foods, salty foods, and they tend to be energy dense, right? So a lot of calories in a small bite, essentially. Food noise is also feeling tempted to check food delivery apps multiple times a day, right? You're like, ooh, what can I get? Or what's not, what's hot and fresh, right? Or thinking about the next meal to consume while you're currently eating a meal. Now, I am guilty of more than one of those things, right? And that's just part of our society, right? We're sort of surrounded by food everywhere we turn. So if we are using intuition and paying attention and being mindful, then we can work with that and we can navigate through the food noise. Now, this rumination and obsession, really, it's like this preoccupation about food has recently referred to food-related intrusive thoughts. So we might, I think, in time, maybe, or maybe not, we might have more understanding about this, like food-related intrusive thoughts. Is there a spectrum that all of us fall on? And is there a degree where it is extreme and severe and requires some intervention on some level, right? I think it's just a matter of time before we learn that. Food noise is believed to be experienced by people with and without clinically diagnosed eating disorders. So sometimes it's more prevalent with eating disorders, but sometimes those without them will experience food noise, particularly if someone's struggling with their body weight or their body image, they may struggle with food noise. It becomes problematic when it interferes with our ability to maintain a balanced approach to eating, and it prevents us from meeting our goals, whether they be health related or whatever our goals are, right? Or it could be a problem if it doesn't allow us to focus on other aspects of our life. And that's sometimes that preoccupation, right? You're missing out otherwise on life because food has kind of consumed you. It may also contribute eventually to overeating and maladaptive eating behaviors, including emotional eating. So a little bit more about that in a bit. What contributes to food noise, right? So what are the things that we know of in terms of biology and pathology? It's hunger, our hunger hormones, which we all have, restrictive eating. Now that's something that is pervasive, I think, in our society. Emotional triggers, external triggers can contribute to food noise, metabolic disorders like PCOS, insulin sensitivity, and endometriosis. So again, if you're like, ooh, that's me, that's me, that's me, maybe I have food noise too, and I haven't realized it. That's when you can reach out again to your healthcare provider, work with a dietitian, work with a licensed counselor. There's a lot of help in this area. Now, the rise of incretin therapy, I mentioned GLP-1s is an example of one. GLP-1s are very popular, but this is just one of many to come. There's a whole gamut that I think is on the horizon. And so the appropriate way to define them is incretin therapy. So I was talking about that in an earlier question, and now I want to return to it. So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. Now you know what that stands for. And it's a peptide hormone made by our small intestine. And our own GLP-1 is short acting. The prescription GLP-1s, as you can imagine, they're probably a little bit stronger and they're longer acting, so they have a greater effect, absolutely, in the body. Now, there's more than one role of GLP-1, and these are the natural hormones that our body makes, right? So they trigger insulin release from the pancreas. So the pancreas gets the GLP-1, it says, ooh, we got to send out some insulin. That's a hormone that helps lower our blood sugars. GLP-1 also blocks glucagon secretion, so that's counter-regulatory to the insulin, and it's a hormone we make in response to low blood sugars, to make more blood sugars. So this is also sort of like something that helps regulate our blood sugars as well, which has an effect on our appetite. GLP-1s slow stomach emptying, so we sort of feel full longer on a smaller amount of food. And it also increases satiety, right? Like we feel full on a smaller amount, and then that feeling lasts longer after we eat. So how do we work with food noise? Because not all of us can take a GLP-1, right? But good to know that that might be an option and one that I want you to discuss with your healthcare provider if you're curious about that. And that's for another Ask a Dietitian, I think. That's a good topic. It can feel overwhelming, but remember that not all food noise is bad. It's not like it's a bad thing. We don't want to feel ashamed or guilt if we feel like we're dealing with food noise. We can work with it. And one of the best tools to work with it is using mindful eating. Mindful eating is a way of eating where we are more aware of the experience of eating, and also we're reserving judgment. So we're not allowing thoughts like, I'm being good or I'm being bad, because food does not define our self-worth or our value. It's just food, right? It tastes good. It gives us nourishment. and that's where it ends. Okay. Mindful eating also helps to identify the difference between hunger and food noise. That would be a good thing, right? Hunger is a natural sign that we need to eat, right? It's driven by internal and physical cues. We need hunger, and hunger is not a bad thing either. We need it to survive. Our ancestors relied on it, right? Food noise, on the other hand, is often triggered by external factors such as emotions or stress. Okay, good to know that. So how do we work with food noise? Sorry. Check for physical symptoms of hunger. So if you literally can describe hunger being your stomach growling, or you start to notice your energy starting to go down and down, or the time of your last meal, think, when did I eat last? If you can't even remember, chances are that's hunger, right? Or sometimes if you're having trouble focusing, I know that that happens for some people I work with. You might also notice the rate of the cue. Physical hunger is often gradual, and that's how our appetite works. It sort of builds and builds and builds and says, hey, it's time to eat now, until the point where you get hangry, right? Emotional hunger, on the other hand, it tends to have a rapid onset, right? It comes out of nowhere, and you might have just eaten like 10 minutes ago, and all of a sudden you have this emotional hunger. It comes on very quickly. Notice any specific triggers for emotional eating. So sometimes people can say, yes, I emotionally eat when I'm stressed, when I'm bored, when I'm anxious, or if I'm feeling sad or alone. Those are just a few examples. There are many, many others to list. And I think identifying those are an important step to help you understand, is it time to eat or not? You can also identify the craving, right? So with physical hunger, you may be open to eating anything, right? Because it's hunger and you're like, okay, I can have that broccoli. But with emotional hunger, it seems like there's specific foods that we emotionally want to eat, right? So it might be something sweet or salty, for example. It tends to be comfort foods. And that's the only thing that will do, right? That broccoli will not do if we're having an emotional craving. You also might want to think about pausing and giving yourself the chance to respond. And a lot of times that's mindfulness, right? Like just being present to the moment. And you can ask yourself these questions. Did something trigger this urge to eat? Is it internal? Is it external? Right? Or even if it's internal, is it my emotions that are triggering it? Am I actually hungry? And I have a great visual towards the end of the presentation to share as well that helps with this. Okay, next question. How to kick a sugar craving habit? Oh, I couldn't help myself. I had to ask back a question. Is it possible for us to be addicted to sugar? Well, I might change your mind on this one if you said yes. So some say that sugar creates a neurobiological change that's similar to illicit drug addictions. Okay, that's fine. The DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the fifth edition, characterized addiction by these things: withdrawal symptoms. So if you do not use the substance, you have physical withdrawal symptoms. Tolerance. So it takes more and more to elicit the same response. Risky use. So you might put yourself in some dangerous and compromising situations, not only physically, but mentally, in order to use the substance. Impaired control. I think that is something that people who want sugar and have sugar cravings will share. They feel like sort of out of control. Or they have social problems, right? So it's probably more than one of these things to actually define an addiction. So social problems, meaning like you probably don't go out much, right? Because you want to just use that substance, right? Or you miss, like, a birthday party because you want to use that substance and you don't go to the birthday party. Those are pretty extreme measures of an addiction, right? I think so. So if sugar were that addictive, I think this is a funny joke. People would be going right for the corn syrup, right? Or the Cara, the corn syrup, right out of the bottle. And we'd be doing it and avoiding all things outside in the world and what's happening. And we'd be having, tolerance to that. So it would take 2 bottles of corn syrup to elicit the same response. So I think what you understand what I'm getting at. We don't think that sugar can be an addiction the same way an illicit drug is an addiction. They're just not the same things. They can't be. So to automatically assume that sugar is addictive because we eat too much of it, that's one thing, right? But that doesn't explain an addiction, and it neglects the fact that our diet, that our food choices really are so much more complicated than that, right? It's not fair to say that that's an addiction. There's probably something else that's driving it, right? And probably something else you're feeling or experiencing that is making it not an addiction. Okay. So most experts, I would say all, would think that we cannot be addicted to sugar, just biologically speaking. So sugar in the context of the total diet. Here's the thing, sugar is not the only thing responsible for the state of our health. I think there's this fear around sugar right now. I'm going to speak to that in a program that I'm presenting here in collaboration with Longevity on Monday. It's not too late to register. You'll see it right on the Cancer Wellness Center calendar. And it's all about the top 5 myths about cancer and nutrition. And guess which one of those myths is all about sugar, right? Because we're afraid of it. It seems like it's another pervasive thing, especially in oncology nutrition, where we're afraid of sugar. And it's like we can't touch it. It's so bad for us. It's dangerous, right? It's one component of all of the foods and ingredients that we could possibly eat. And if you want to know more about that, register for the program on Monday because I'll spend a lot more time talking about it. There is definitely good reasons to stand that we will benefit by focusing less on making one food or one ingredient the villain, right? Because it's one component of the total diet and the overall quality of our diet, not our intake of one single food, determines how nourishing our diet is. We know that based in the evidence. Nothing bad is going to happen to us if we eat sugary food occasionally, or if we eat gluten or dairy or grains or chickpeas or whatever else some social media influencer is trying to tell you. You got to just put that. That's not food noise. That's like misinformation noise. And we just got to quiet that down and talk to someone who knows better. What we do know is that a varied diet, like lots of plants, especially eating enough protein, and that might be relevant for someone on cancer treatment, eating whole grains, having Oreos here and there, just for an example, moving our bodies a lot, coping with our stress, or at least trying to manage our stress as best as we can, getting adequate sleep, our outlook on life, our connections to the community, all of these are important, right? So now you see how much more complicated it gets, where when we're starting to focus on sugar being so bad for us, it is so much pressure on ourselves that we start to think, I cannot eat it. And if I do, I'm bad. I'm putting myself into a bad situation when that's just not the case. And it's probably only causing us this fear. It's only really making that fear worse, right? So, and that's what I want to talk about next. So, have you heard of the forbidden fruit effect? I think this is me. Like, if you told me I could not eat something, I would want it even more, right? So, cravings do exist. It's not because of a lack of willpower or a lack of control. That's nonsense. Often it's because we're not letting ourselves eat something we want. So, that just creates this cycle where we restrict, we restrict, we restrict. Eventually, guess what? We're going to cave because we're human and because it's impossible to be that restrictive. Our body doesn't want that. Our body needs food, and our body will take food in any form that it can get it, right? So when we eventually do break down and eat it, we double back and we restrict again. So we're like on this constant cycle that is just not serving us, right? And we can really reduce the cravings if we think about that cycle in a different way. Often we might have cravings because we're not getting enough sleep, and that's highly prevalent in oncology, I find. So that's something to think about as it relates to you and to discuss with your healthcare provider as well. If we're stressed, again, highly prevalent in oncology. So if you're feeling anxious, distressed, any of those things, I think just keep that in mind that may be might be some of your triggers too for the craving. And that's why working with an oncology dietitian is helpful because he or she is going to get it and understand that a holistic approach is best. It's not like we're going to cut sugar out from your diet. We're going to like dive deeper and see what might be the source of those cravings and then manage those things. And then all of a sudden, naturally, the cravings just start to quiet down, right? Which is really nice. Cravings a lot of the time are emotional, and our diet industry, as I understand it, and anyone telling you to restrict sugar is it's only going to make it worse. It's only going to make this problem, this fear, this desire for it, it's only making it worse when we pay attention to those things. Our bodies are equipped to eat all sorts of food, and that includes sugar. And that's why all of the experts say a little bit of sugar is okay, right? If it's a little bit in the context of a lot of the really healthy stuff, it's going to get diluted. Any ill effects are going to get diluted, especially if we focus on that. So, okay, so how do we then help someone through this? I think it's important to recognize first that there's nothing wrong if sugar makes us feel good. And acknowledging that and using it as one of the things that makes us feel good, then that's really liberating because then we don't have to fear it and we don't have to feel bad or guilty or ashamed after we eat it, right? So it's a really nice thing to work with. We want our diet to be physically nourishing, but that doesn't preclude the eating of delicious things. And sometimes I think that way, if we have something that's delicious and maybe it's not the most nutritious, we might benefit from it on some level, maybe emotionally, as long as we still feel good that we made that decision to eat that delicious food and we don't feel bad about it. And we understand it's okay. It's one choice out of so many that we make, right? We're constantly bombarded by diet companies and even just the industry that tell us to remove food from our diet and that enjoying food like sugar and eating sugary foods, this is shameful and wrong. We don't want to listen to any of that, right? Because that's not serving us. There's a stronger, there, also the diet industry will start to make us feel like we're stronger or healthier if we focus on this motivation based on, again, this external thought. Like, who's the they that tell us we're not supposed to have sugar? What do they know? They don't know. And they're adding to this pressure, right? And they're also making us feel like we're weak, right? Or we have no willpower because we want it and we end up having it. That's not fair. Once we take the restrictions off, it's really interesting to find all of a sudden we might find out that the things that we told ourselves all along and they're kind of deeply planted in our brain, all of a sudden they're not as tempting anymore. It's really interesting. I've seen it happen. I've worked with people where that's happened, where all of a sudden, if you give yourself permission, it doesn't become so desired anymore, right? It's a really nice transition to think about. So, okay, so how then, here's some tips for handling food cravings otherwise. So sometimes this is what you'll see from responsible practitioners and dietitians working in this field. They will suggest that we schedule eating, right? Because if we're sort of craving something and we're sort of erratic with eating, if we have a schedule, then we can sort of start to tune in to, again, that attuned or intuitive eating, like when did I eat? Am I hungry? Is this emotional? Maybe I can do something else, right? So if we schedule meals, schedule snacks, we can plan for them. And that's very empowering, by the way. And especially snacks, and when they're nourishing, maybe containing a source of protein, and it could be a plant protein, of course, and something maybe portable, depending on your schedule, this can help you feel more in control. When those cravings rise, we might want to think about other things to kind of distract us because chances are it'll pass. Remember, they come up quickly and they will probably go away just as quickly. Physical hunger, not the same. It rises slow and it doesn't go away until we eat, right? So if we take a walk, if we work on a hobby, we call a friend, that can help that intense craving pass, right? You can also ask yourself that question, am I actually hungry? Am I bored? Or am I lonely? Some people I work with will keep a craving journal. I think this is kind of cute. So not an all day long food journal, but just a journal around the times when the cravings pop up, right? So again, it's empowering because it's like it helps you put yourself in control. You're not judging it, you're just observing. And you're saying, oh, it seems to be that at 2 o'clock every day I get this craving, or after dinner before bed, I get this craving. What's going on here? Let me dive deeper and see how I can help myself, right? And it really helps put you in control. All right, next question. I like sugar, and that is my only vice. I try to limit my intake, and I kind of just talked about that. So hopefully that helped solve that part of this question. But a food sensitivity test revealed that I'm moderately reactive to candida. I'm going to answer that in one slide next, okay? Second part of that question, I know this means I crave sugar, and that is indeed how I feel. How do I stop this craving, please? So food sensitivity really doesn't have any sort of standard medical definition. It can be used to mean a range of things. Often this term is used instead of food intolerance, such as a sulfite sensitivity or a histamine sensitivity. Other times it could be used as like a catch-all phrase that includes both allergies and intolerances. So we really don't have like a medically defined definition for food sensitivity. If you think you have an allergy or an intolerance, please talk to your healthcare provider. That may prompt more important, necessary medical intervention, especially with that food allergy. Discuss your symptoms with your healthcare provider so that other possible conditions can be ruled out first. Food sensitivity is not an official diagnosis, but of course, it's popular and people talk about it, right? And food sensitivity blood tests, and this is a big business. All right, so Candida, I'm going to go to that next. So Candida is often referred to as pseudo yeast. If you're not familiar with Candida is, it's a complex form of fungus with yeast-like traits. So it's not technically yeast, although it's often referred to as yeast. Candida, along with the many other microbes that are normally naturally present in our body, it's often benign, but under certain circumstances, it can cause various infections. So you may have heard of yeast infections. That's often from the Candida yeast-like pseudo yeast that it is. So the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology issued a position statement way back in 1986 that the concept of candidiasis hypersensitivity should be regarded only as speculative and unproven unless supported by competent research. There hasn't been an update since 1986 because there hasn't been any research that has suggested that this is the case. So when you see any information about Candida, just ignore it, right? It's either dated information, there's nothing that we know of that's necessary. Or again, discuss this with your healthcare provider, right? But this food sensitivity test that tested for this, it was not accurate. And I'm so sorry that you spent money on that and learned that information because I have a lot more to share about food sensitivity tests next. So about them, there's a variety of tests that are available. They're offered to that make this offer to claim that they test for food sensitivities. There's a lack of evidence to support their use. A lot of these tests they're like direct to consumer tests. So like we order it online, it gets shipped to home, and then we mail it back in. If you've noticed, they've left out a healthcare provider in that process, and that's troublesome right off the bat, right? So we're trusting that this company, who are they, right? Do they even know who we are? And what are they doing, right? What's happening behind there, right? We probably want to include a physician or a healthcare provider in that process. So they typically use what's called immunoglobulin antibodies. So food sensitivity tests typically look at the presence of IgG, not IgE. And IgG antibodies, there's a distinction there. They have not been shown to reliably identify either a food allergy or a so-called food sensitivity. So they've looked at this in research and they are not accurately able to identify a food allergy or food sensitivity. We do produce IgG antibodies, and most of us do after we eat something. So guess what? You're almost always going to be positive for something. They're not specific to a sensitivity. A past or frequent exposure to a food may cause that to be more likely to be positive, right? So that's why if you had some bread or some products with Candida in it, or you just happen to produce more in your gut, and that's what came through on the food sensitivity test, that may explain it. But most of us will have a positive, which seems like a pretty interesting conflict of interest, right? If a food company or a food sensitivity test company, is trying to test for a positive result so that it can make recommendations to you, you're going to be happy that you paid that money to them to get those results. Because if you were negative, you were like, what does this mean, right? So point to be made here, they're not accurate, these tests. They're not even testing the right thing. IgE are different. IgE tests for allergies, food allergies, and those are backed by research. Okay, so the restrictions tested by IgG test results can possibly mislead you, right? And so now there's this concern, I can't eat these foods, I have to avoid them. How do I do that? It creates a lot of chaos and a lot of, I think, anxiety and distress over something that's really terribly false. They may also create a psychological pattern, right, where we feel negative about eating any food. We might start to question things like, what if I eat this? Is that going to cause some problems? Did they test for all of the things that I might be sensitive to? The worst case scenario is that it may prompt someone who has a true food allergy to include those foods that they're allergic to in their diet because the food sensitivity test didn't test for the right marker for the food allergy. So that's really concerning, right? We want to be aware of that. So all of the professional organizations that specialize in the treatment of food allergies, they do not recommend IgG testing, sorry, they recommend IgE. And I can personally share, I have one of my sons has an IgE test, and he did test positive for a food allergy. He had very common symptoms, so now it's out of his diet. We're going to retest in a year, and we're going to make sure he's okay, right? But we're not using IgG to test. And I saw an allergist, a physician. He was involved in the process. This is why we have to pay out of pocket for these tests, right? They're often not covered by insurance. They're often not including a healthcare provider. So probably not something that is worth our time. So how much of our current eating choices are governed by emotions versus actual hunger? How do we tune into our actual hunger cues? I like those questions too. So I did the best I could with looking into the research. And here's what I found based on surveys. Basically, at this time, we think that about 38% of adults say that they have overeaten or eaten unhealthy foods in the past month because of stress. And it might be higher because I think sometimes people don't want to admit that they're doing something, right? Half of these adults report engaging in these behaviors more than once a month, right? It's like a week or more, once a week or more. A third of adults who report overeating or eating unhealthy foods, they do it because of stress. And they say it helps as a way of coping from stress. I can relate to that for sure. And 27% of adults say that they eat to manage stress, while almost a third, a little over a third, of those who report overeating or eating unhealthy foods, they say they do it out of a habit, right? So they really have kind of ingrained and conditioned their body that when feeling stressed, they turn to food. 43% of women report having overeaten or eaten unhealthy foods in the past month due to stress. A little bit less often happening for men, right? Maybe they eat, I don't know, maybe they do something else besides eat. I didn't look at the survey. All right, so emotional eaters are more likely to eat more sugary and high-fat foods, eat in response to stressors, and snack more frequently compared to non-emotional eaters. Good to know. Greater emotional eating was related with elevated consumption of energy-dense snacks, such as sweet and fatty foods, and these associations were predominantly stronger in women suffering from depression. All good to know, right? So like if high-fat foods are in your environment, if stress is involved, if you have a history of depression or currently being treated for clinical depression, this is good to know. If you're concerned about emotional eating, we want to, again, get to the root cause and really try to restructure the environment to be helpful. Emotional eaters frequently feel negative emotions concerning their physical appearance right after the eating events. Okay. And I think that's real unfortunate because I don't want food to do that to ourselves. Eating behavior is also able to affect and influence body image, resulting in body dissatisfaction, which implies the body-related negative self-assessment of a person. Right. So, it's where there's this cycle, right? So it seems like we eat a certain way, we don't feel good about our bodies, we feel bad about it, we feel worse. We continue to repeat that cycle over and over again. So how do we address emotional eating? There are interventions that are known to be effective. Stress management is included, cognitive behavior therapy, and that's working again with a licensed professional counselor. And conscious access to healthier snacks should be considered. And that was a result of that survey with all of those statistics that I shared. So I think that's important to note that those have been proven to be effective means, right? So if that's something that you want to think about. When we feel physical signs of hunger, the body, again, remember, it's telling us it needs energy. So physically, if we tune into that hunger, it's time to eat. Unfortunately, this happens to many people over time is that we ignore that, right? We forget what it feels like to feel hunger. We might overeat past that, right? And so that's where it takes some time and some practice in relearning what hunger and eating and satisfaction feels like. Schedules, lack of time, stress, and diets, that they're all linked with us overeating and ignoring any of our hunger or fullness signs. We have a great group here. It's called Food and Fitness for Wellness, just a little self promo. So I co-facilitate that group. We run it twice a year, and we're going to recruit over the summer for our next group. And it really helps to integrate all of the components that one might want to work on as it relates to emotional eating as well. So if you're interested in it, please just ask about the Food and Fitness for Wellness. So which cues, I'm going to quiz you now, which cues are related to which type of hunger? So physical hunger versus emotional hunger. If we have fatigue, a lack of energy, our stomach's growling, or we have a headache, we're getting a little shaky, a little irritable. We might be irritable for other things, but brain fog, inability to focus, those sudden cravings, physical or mental exhaustion, heightened emotion, stress. We have two categories here. So we have physical hunger and emotional hunger. So hopefully you understand sometimes there's a little overlap, but I think there are some very clear signs to a physical versus emotional hunger. Now you see them for yourself. The goal is to start to become in tune with your individual hunger and even your satiety cues, and to familiarize yourself regularly with this. Like, right, so what are your physical signs? And to learn them regularly for yourself. This is from Michelle May. She's a physician, and she really has worked in this field about mindful eating for quite some time now. And I find this is a really useful tool, a great visual tool for you to kind of ask some questions as you work through mindful eating. So it really sort of opens the door to understanding a little bit more about why you eat, when you eat, and how much you're eating. It helps you become aware, which is great, right? Because a lot of times this is autopilot, we're not paying attention. And it helps us to be in charge, which I love. I love, I love. If we can empower ourselves, right? We can really connect the two. And the goal with using a mindful eating cycle like this is to create a peaceful way to eat food, which ultimately is going to be beneficial for you, right? So why, when, what do I eat? How do I eat? How much? Where am I eating? All of those questions are really helpful in understanding the intricacies of you. All right, next question. I have a couple left. Thanks for hanging in there. Not wanting to eat fatty foods, as I do not want to get or be fat. Same with high calorie foods. So what makes us fat anyway? Guess what? This might be alarming to some of you, or maybe something shocking, right? Yeah, at the minimum. Overeating does not cause obesity. Obesity is a disease as we understand it today, and the disease causes overeating. I hope you stay with that for a moment. So clinically, obesity is diagnosed when a practitioner determines that there's excessive fat accumulation, and that excessive fat is impairing health or bodily functions. There's more than one cause, and there may be several, and it can be tough for someone to pinpoint. But there are four main factors that play a role in the expression of obesity as a disease. So the four are genetics, our environment, human behavior, and appetite, right? So if we, again, narrow down, I ate this, I ate too much sugar, I ate too much fat, we're failing to acknowledge all of the other variables that influence this disease, right? So let's start with genetics. So genetics predispose us to become obese, right? Or where we might land on the BMI curve. The degree to which genetics play a role in obesity is variable, but it's up to 70%, which is pretty significant, right? Genes also determine how much environmental factors impact our weight. So for example, a great one is inadequate sleep. So some people hardly get sleep ever. It doesn't influence, they might have the genetic makeup where that doesn't influence their weight, whereas others, it might have a significant impact. And what about our environment? There's several factors in our environment that influence our weight. So the unavailability of fresh, healthful foods, if we just don't have access to them. I think this is fascinating, but true. Modern heating units and air conditioners, they prevent our body from working hard. to stay cool or stay warm. So that influences our weight on some level. Social environment, such as the influence of our habits on our lifestyle, and then the use of medication. So sometimes that absolutely, we know this absolutely, that they can influence our weight. And then we have our behavior. So these are the things that we're sort of in control of, right? So diet quality and the quality and the quantity of the food that we eat, as well as how much physical activity we get. Sedentary lifestyles due to technology, due to our working habits, right? Due to public transportation, lack of scheduled physical activity, the loss of jobs that require physical exertion. All of these things are influencing our weight. Family dynamics, right? So what's going on at home, mental health, these all affect food choices. Dining out frequently affects our weight. And then stress, and again, that sleep seems to play a major role as well. Now, the last thing, the fourth thing is hormones. Our bodies make hormones that control our appetite and absolutely influence our weight. So our bodies are designed to preserve fat stores in order to help us survive in lean times, something we haven't yet adapted to in today's era of abundance. In the pathophysiology of obesity, the body continues to produce hunger hormones, even when there's ample storage of fats, right? Which tells our body to eat, which is wild, right? So again, that's something that's out of our control. To complicate this, when someone starts to lose weight and maybe has that excess weight, the body reacts and responds, and it produces ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone. So that will rise with weight loss. So it's like sort of, we're kind of stuck here, right? It's a very involved situation here. So weight loss results in a decrease in metabolic rate. And so again, when that happens, plus the rise in an appetite hormone and the decrease in the satiety hormone, and that's why it seems like this is a chronic disease. It requires ongoing multidisciplinary care, right? It's not something that the diet industry is going to fix, and not even what a dietitian can fix, right? You need a whole team to address this. If you're concerned about your weight related to your health, it is possible, I'm here to help you with that, that your behaviors, regardless of what you weigh, your behaviors can improve your health. If you're concerned about your weight related to your body image, I know that there's effective strategies that can help promote your body image. And that again is regardless of your weight. If it's any or a combination of the above, you can certainly work with a healthcare professional, a counselor, a dietitian, and there are ways to help yourself. Okay, last question, I promise. So which foods to avoid with letrozole, Zoladex, and ribociclib? So the first is to avoid grapefruit, Seville oranges, starfruit, pomelo, which is so yummy, pomegranate, or other foods that contain those things, because the blood levels of that medication can be affected by certain foods and other medications, so they should be avoided. Speak to your provider or a pharmacist about that specifically. Hopefully you were informed about that, but also speak to your healthcare provider if you're taking any other medication, dietary supplements, because we want to just make sure there's no interaction. Now, what about letrozole and Zoladex? There's really there's no restrictions because there's no interactions regarding to food, but some people that are on Zoladex, they may experience some hot flashes. So sometimes food triggers may be the culprit for those hot flashes, and they might identify something like spicy foods cause their hot flashes. So that might be something worth reviewing. Be careful where you find your nutrition information from, whether it's online or social media. We know right now that is not trustworthy. And it's very tempting because it's so easy to access and it seems so important to follow, but most of it's misinformation. Experts advise that you choose a variety of whole plant foods to optimize the nutrition in your diet, right? If you still have further questions about that, ask your dietitian, ask your healthcare provider for a referral to a dietitian. I'm here at Cancer Wellness Center to help. All right, so there are some resources to share. National Nutrition Month, again, that campaign that tells us all about how to eat healthy, how to help us make informed choices. You can click right there on that link. Mindful eating and that mindful eating cycle, that image that I shared with you, great website for more comprehensive information. And then Look Good, Feel Better is a great organization that addresses body image as it relates to cancer. So if you're unfamiliar, that might be worth some of your time as well. Now I shared some recipes for those who registered, and I think the idea here is that they're sort of going to force mindful eating. whether they take a long time to cook them or prepare them or to work through them and sit and savor them, they sort of force mindfulness, which is a really nice way to experience food. Now we have our next scheduled Ask the Dietitian for the first Friday in April, which is the 4th. It's at 1 o'clock. And our topic will be food additives. So I hope you can join us for that next episode. I'm going to stop my share and I thank you for attending. If you're still here, I know I went over.